Well, good evening again, and welcome back to now week 7. Seemed like we just started this Leadership 911 chat series only yesterday, but we are in week 7 now of a transformational leadership virtual summit. The goal is to help leaders all over the place respond to initially the COVID 19 crisis that was sweeping the nation, but really equip them to respond and help their teams, organizations, families, you name it, make it through any sort of crisis that may come their way. Because this is the truth. Crises are not uncommon to man. We've experienced them all throughout history. But the courageous leadership that is necessary to navigate through those times is very much uncommon. So we've been sitting down with change champions. We've been sitting down with those who have navigated the waters in different sectors of business to sort of help us get through these tough times. And tonight is no different. No matter how strong you are physically, we've seen it depicted in movies time and time again, where the weaker individual is able to defeat a seemingly insurmountable giant by getting into his head. Because if you can mess with somebody's thinking, their thoughts, their confidence in themselves, you can take those giants down. And so, right now, the crisis that we are experiencing, COVID 19, health scares, unemployment scares, and now the civil unrest, that's going to affect our mental health. And if we're not sharp and we're not focused and we're not thinking good thoughts or adequately equipped to combat the negative thoughts that may come our way, we can find ourselves in some dark places. So tonight I get to sit down with someone who I know you guys are going to love and enjoy, a licensed professional counselor and mindset coach, Marquita Myrick, and I want to welcome Marquita to the broadcast.
Thank you so much, Charles, for just inviting me to join you on this chat series. I'm so excited about these topics that we're going to cover tonight, and I really think it's going to touch someone very deeply and really motivate and encourage a lot of people. Very excited to
Yes,
be.
thank you for that. And so, like usual, we want this to be a discussion. We're going to sit down and we're going to talk about the importance of mental health and, for ourselves, for our kids, and if you're leading a remote team, for your remote teams, or if you're just trying to lead yourself through this time, things that you can look out for to be mindful of as we try and make it through the tough times that we're experiencing. So send us your questions. Send Marquita your hearts, your thumbs up. Talk to her so she knows that she's hitting the points that are relevant to you. And maybe if you have a question, drop it in the chat, and we'll try and get it in. That way she can answer that question as well. But if you don't have anything else, Marquita, I'm really excited to go ahead and get started. So if you're ready, I'm ready.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. Let us know who we have with us in the chat. If you can hear us, if you can see us, if everything looks good. That way we know that we are not um, lagging or something like that with all the technology and the thousands of people that are using, Spectrum's Wi-Fi right now and all of this broadband that is being consumed. So let us know if you can hear us and you can see us if there's any lag. So let's start here though. Let's kind of start simple because mental health and professional counseling can be one of those things that is sort of difficult for just anybody to pick up and get involved with, right? When you're talking about sitting down helping somebody else with their thoughts, right, and their mental state, how is it first and foremost, Ms. Marquita, that you got involved with mental health counseling and now the mindset coaching that you're doing? Let's start
Yeah.
there.
Thank you so much for that question. So I grew up in a small city in Louisiana, Hammond, Louisiana, and I moved away and went to Boulder, Colorado for undergrad.
Okay.
And shortly after, I got very started getting symptoms of depression. Ended up seeing a
Okay.
doctor who encouraged me to see a therapist. And my own experience, for to make it really short for everyone, is that I experienced such troubling depression and anxiety that
Mm,
once I recovered, I thought, I'm very curious to know how this worked because what I knew is that I was sitting and talking with someone once a week for an hour.
okay.
And then 2 months later, my mom made a comment on the phone and she said, "You are sounding so much better. You seem much
Mm,
happier, and I'm so glad our prayers have worked." And so I revealed
Wow.
at that time, 2 months into therapy, that I had been seeing a counselor on the campus at the Multicultural Counseling Center,
Okay.
and she knew that she was sold on counseling then too. So so
So what
yeah, go
what now I want to ask, what was it about, or did you sort of discover what was it that sent you down that path of feeling depressed and being in that sort of a low state? Did you ever kind of get to it? Not to
yeah,
go
I
into the
did.
details of the personal, but like were you able
Yeah.
to identify like what got you there?
Yeah, I was. So, I mean, I was really homesick. I was missing family and friends, right? Because when you move away and you expect people to stay connected and you try and then they don't. So
Right,
that
right.
was very difficult for me. I was dealing with isolation, a lot of social isolation. It's definitely a different cultural makeup in Boulder, Colorado than the one
Oh,
I grew up in Hammond, Louisiana. So I felt different. I felt out of place. I felt like the minority, and in fact, I was. So navigating that was very difficult. Having to start over, having to figure out, how do I fit in here? How do
yeah.
I not stick out like a sore thumb, right? And then what also contributed to the depression, not sure what that sound is, down the line, was the fact that my grades started to plummet, right? And so once
Okay.
that happens, it's it adds on to the depression. So
Yeah.
those were some of the things that really contributed to the depression for me.
Wow. And just thinking about the state we're in right now with COVID-19 and what it's caused us to be displaced and isolate ourselves, some of those similar patterns we're seeing where you are having to shut yourself away from people who you're usually connecting with, even
Yeah.
activities and things that you used to do that were a part of your life every day have been stripped and taken away from us. So that could be very much something that causes a person in this day and age right now, with what we're facing, to begin to feel a little depressed because they're. I mean, you think about kids, and I know we're going to talk about kids a little bit later
Yeah.
on, but who had to do away with preparing for prom and do away with homecoming court and do away with graduations, and how that stripping ourselves of those things, those
Yeah.
life events that we had planned, family vacations that were planned during the winter and in January February time frame, or summer vacations depending on where you're going, that were a big part of our lives were stripped from us, and that could just send us into some dark places because a lot of us really depended on that. Whether it's a healthy or not healthy, we can talk
Yeah.
about. That's a different discussion. But we depended on some of those things, right?
Yeah.
So that's good. But you were able to go and sit down with a counselor, and you were able to recover and get well. Now I have to ask you, it worked for you. It's worked for many people. I'm a relationship coach myself, so I've seen the successes. But I have to ask, why is there this stigma around sitting down and talking to a mental health professional? Why do you feel there is?
Yeah. Yeah, I think when we talk about stigma with mental health, there are different types of stigma. So I'm just going to speak in a general fashion about it. The media portrays an image of mental health that's not always accurate. And sometimes they portray this image of people with severe schizophrenia, and they're acting a certain way, right? And so when we watch these, and that's just one example, and we watch these movies and we begin to think this is what mental illness looks like, right? Or the person who's depressed and then they're immediately suicidal and all of a sudden they're not safe to be around, right? And what we don't think about is that in the context of the movie, it's happening really fast. In real life, people some
Kind
people
of
do spiral
regressive.
out of control. Yeah, it's very compressed
Yeah.
in a movie, and in real life it takes years, sometimes months, sometimes years, for those things to kind of show and spiral out of control, especially in the case of schizophrenia. It might not show up automatically. So that's just one reason. I think another reason is there's mental health and then there's mental illness, right? And so when we talk about health, we have to think, for our physical health, we say health. Are you generally healthy, right? And then
Yes.
there's cancer, then there's diabetes, just to name a few. There's high blood pressure, right? So those are all some of the negative things that can happen with one's physical health. When we talk about mental health, it's very different from mental illness. Mental illness is diagnosable, right? That's the medical model of therapy that we follow.
Yes, ma'am.
And in my practice in general, I'm not diagnosing people a lot because I don't, well, at all, because I don't accept insurance right now, right? When you accept insurance, there's a requirement to diagnose. And so
Okay.
one of the stigmas used to be that, well, that will stay on your insurance record, right? So people would not seek mental health care because of that. They were afraid of that trail, that mental health trail
Wow.
following them.
Okay.
Now there was some changes with that, and so my understanding is that those diagnoses no longer follow you, although they might in your doctor's office, right? If you carry your paperwork to the next provider. But this stigma about mental illness is that if I go to therapy, they're going to the counselor is going to diagnose me, or I should just say clinician, because there are different types of clinicians under that hat. Um, some with masters and some with doctorate degrees, but people are afraid to be diagnosed because when you're diagnosed, then all of a sudden we put this medical model on it, and now something's really wrong with you. You have a severe mental illness. And so some people don't realize that counseling doesn't have to be about a diagnosis and that's just a label that's applied to get your insurance to pay. And in general, it can just be talking, and there could be something that needs to be diagnosed, and maybe your clinician discusses that with you and maybe not. Some do, some don't. But it's not always about the illness aspect of it. So that's when we talk about stigma, I like to bring that point up, because mental health is mental health, and mental illness, they're related, but they're two separate things.
Two different things. I
Yeah.
think that was a great point. I haven't heard that broken down that way before. So the fact that having a medical diagnosis versus just going to see someone about my just overall mental health can be two
Hmm.
separate things, and
Yep.
maybe it does lead to a diagnosis, but you would much rather get the diagnosis so you can get the help. But some people can go further into depression when you get the diagnosis because now they think
Yep.
they're going to be treated a certain way, right? Because we
Yep.
have so many times where once I'm labeled a certain way, there's this expectation that I'm going to behave a certain way, and that is not something any of us want. So thank you for breaking
Right.
that down for us.
Of course. Yeah.
That's really good. What are some of then the warning signs that a person is that a mental disorder is coming? Like, what can we be on the
Yeah.
lookout for that we're starting to spiral, like you say, it's not compressed like in
Yeah.
a movie.
Yep. Not
It's
like
kind of
that.
over time, right? So what can we be looking for?
Yeah. That's always a good question. And sometimes it's difficult to answer, I'll be honest, because there are so many different things that you have to specify, even when you're diagnosing, when you're looking to see what someone might really have, so you can understand how to treat it. I usually just talk about depression in general when I get that question. So a loss of interest in things that a person would typically enjoy. So if you notice, you were having brunch with your friend every week, and for 3 weeks straight, that friend is no longer there, and they're also, not responding to text messages as fast. You can't reach them on the phone. They're avoiding that contact. That's a sign, right?
Okay.
If someone notices that they have feelings of hopelessness or helplessness, and then they're tearful a lot, that's also a sign. A lot of people with depression can just cry randomly, and they won't even know what activated that sadness. And that's where counseling comes in, right? To help people identify what it is that's activating the sadness. But those are some of the examples as well. In the case of work, because I know you work with a lot of leaders in the workplace, if their work is now suffering, right? If they're no longer getting projects in on time, if they're getting projects in on time, but it's the quality is different, right? They're showing up
Right.
at the quality is definitely different. It's noticeable. You got to throw that out there.
Right, right.
If they're showing up to meetings, and this was once a person who participated a lot, had a lot to say, maybe sometimes even had to be cut off, and all of a sudden they're quiet in meetings. They're taking notes more. Those are some signs that something might be going on. And I imagine employers might be seeing more of that right now with our current nation's crisis and everything people are going through. It's very hard, even for myself, right? As a counselor doing online therapy, to concentrate. I have to do things to center my mind before I even go there with a client. So those are some of the signs of mental illness. And again, it's not all inclusive because they all have
Yeah,
different
different things
signs.
that you can look out for. But I think depression, like you talked about, do you think depression is one of those things that's kind of sneaky, can really sneak up on a person more so than some of the other, like, mental illness? Because I think depression, and you can help me clarify this, is it
Sure.
about our thoughts? Like the more you think about things that are, say, not right in your life, or things
Mm.
that you've lost, and the power of magnification, the more I think on something, the bigger the issue becomes.
Mm-hmm.
And the bigger the issue becomes to me, then I start to get this feeling of sadness and sink into depression. Is it kind of, is it our thoughts? A lot of it is our
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yeah, it's those cognitive processes where our brain latches on to one thing that then spirals into the next thing, and then all of a sudden we're just negative in our brains all day. So that's definitely part of it. There's definitely, depression is diagnosable as a mental illness, so it's clinical. It's a chemical imbalance in the body, right? And some people don't realize that. They think they can just sleep it away or fight it off, and it's a chemical imbalance. It has to be addressed properly. So yeah, I would say that it's definitely rooted in those thoughts, and it can be, it can run in the family. It can be biological, and it can also be environmental, like what we're experiencing right now. I imagine there are some people whose depression has been re-triggered, or maybe they're starting to show signs of depression and they've never experienced it before, and they're having a hard time identifying what it is. And so some people are just saying, "Oh, I just should stop watching the news," or, "Oh, I should call my friends more," just kind of minimizing it when it's really a big deal when it starts to impact those areas, different areas of your life.
Yeah, I think that, if you're already in a situation where you're battling your thoughts, and then now COVID-19 comes,
Mhm.
right?
Exactly.
This type of crisis. So,
Yep.
well, that's good. So some of the signs. Now let's talk about this social and physical isolation and how that can lead to. And we kind of hinted at it earlier because you kind of felt
Yeah.
some of that when you went off to college. But that
Yeah.
social isolation and physical isolation, how can it really lead to mental breakdowns? And what can we do right now to prevent and overcome the chronic isolation that we're all experiencing,
Yeah.
due to the pandemic?
Yeah. It's so interesting because the mind is, people say the mind is a terrible thing to waste. And I also say the mind is a terrible place to be stuck in by yourself all day,
Wow.
shut in your home. That's a terrible thing, especially if you have not established some positive thinking patterns prior
Wow.
to an event such as a pandemic, right?
Can you say that
So
one more time?
if
Say
I
that
can
one more
remember it,
time.
I'll try.
The the
I'll
mind,
try.
yes, the mind is a terrible thing to waste,
Terrible
but
thing
you
to waste.
said it's
Yeah,
a
being alone with our minds in isolation. I'm definitely saying it differently, but I think people will
wow.
get the point. Being alone with our minds in isolation is also a terrible place to be if you have not created some positive thinking habits and patterns prior to an event such as our current pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
So,
So when we think about, the social isolation we're all experiencing right now, I've encouraged people to get very creative because,
okay.
and a lot of places are starting to open up more now, and so you can go more
Right.
places, but there are even restrictions on that. And some
Yep.
people will turn their nose up at you if you go out to eat. So some people are still staying inside. I've seen
Yeah, it's one of those things where everybody is not ready for the changes that are being implemented by
yeah.
businesses. We were at a salon that opened back up with my boys, and they're kind of getting their hair dyed at the top, the tips.
Yeah.
And there might have been like four of us in the salon, and it's a pretty big space. And one additional lady came in, and she might have had an appointment, but we all had an appointment. But we're
Hmm.
practicing social distancing, and after a few minutes of sitting there, she got up and like throughout the whole salon was like, um, just say Judy, I'm leaving. I'm gonna go get my mask because I wasn't expecting this many people to be here, and it's like,
Oh,
and she didn't just say it to the stylist. She said it like so everybody could hear,
an
as if like we
announcement.
hadn't invaded her hour for her appointment. And so you're right.
Yeah.
Even going out, even though things are opening back up, it's not the
Hmm.
same. It's not
Yep.
the same.
It's not the same. And if I could just add to that, it's an odd thing to walk around with mask on, and you can't see other people's smiles, so now we're having to rely on eye contact and what we pick up from that, or if the person says something to us. So I found that very interesting, and
That is
I've been
true.
wondering, have other people experienced that too, this level of friendliness you used to engage in with
Yeah.
a stranger, and
Yeah.
now it's awkward for people. And that
Wow.
can also contribute to, especially for people who've been locked up, that can contribute to some of this feeling of isolation. Like, wow, now I'm in Publix and I'm talking to people, but I can't see their facial expressions. There's no connection there. I don't feel it anymore the way I used to. So just wanted to throw
Wow.
that in there as
Yeah,
well.
that's a good point because
Thank you.
sometimes our eyes can deceive us, and if we're just trying to go off the eyes and without like are their lips turning up? Are they happy? Did I just take their
Exactly.
card? Was that their bunkie? You're trying to figure that out. So
I took the
you know
last
what?
pasta.
Oh, right, right. Like,
Have to be very careful now.
oh my goodness.
But to
So
go back to, oh, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead. No, finish.
I was just going to go back to the isolation piece
Yeah.
and just what people can do. I love that local businesses have been so creative, from the YMCA to the yoga studio down the street, to my kids' gym that they attend. They all went virtual, right? And
Okay.
so, really staying connected to the people that you would normally see in your normal schedule can be so helpful with that social isolation. There is nothing can replace that in-person interaction. We know
I
that,
agree.
right?
I agree.
But making sure you stay connected, even if it feels different, just giving it a shot because this is what we have for right now, right?
Wow,
For
that's a
those who
good
can no
point.
longer attend the gym in person. And then I've seen families host Zooms every weekend, where all of the family members will get on Zoom or they'll all get on a call, and we've done it with our family, and that was fun to do, to see everyone at one time. And so I think there are ways to connect that some people are missing because they fear technology or they can't figure it out. We have elderly
Yeah.
people in our family hopping on a Zoom. Do we see
Right.
them? No, because they can't figure out how to turn the video on, but they did
But
show up.
we can
And you hear
hear
their
'em.
voice. We can hear you, Grandma. You know? so, so it's a way to stay connected. And so when people even disconnect from those virtual ways of staying connected, again, the mind is a scary place to be when you are alone,
Mm,
when you are isolated. And so
wow.
those are two of the ways I think that people can stay connected and deal with that isolation.
Yeah, that's good. Which brings me to my next point because now that we are isolated, or my next question, how does not having our routines affect our state of mind? Because everything has kind of been broken up right now. We were all used to certain routines with whether it was work or life, family, hobbies, and just how does that affect our state of mind when our routines are broken,
Yeah.
especially
In a
suddenly?
Yeah, suddenly,
Mm-hmm.
in a huge way. I've seen, from my kids to reports from other people's kids to my clients and friends, that lack of routine can cause anxiety, right? Because if you're used to getting to work at 8 a.m. or your kids are used to arriving to school by 7:40, and all of a sudden they're waking up, you're not putting, you're not getting them dressed, you're not doing their hair
Mm-hmm.
anymore, they're not eating breakfast as early. It creates anxiety, especially for kids, because kids love structure, they crave it even though they'll tell you they don't.
And my
in
kids
the
sure fight it.
they fight it, but they thrive off of it. Why? Because they want to know what to expect. And when kids don't know what to expect, it creates anxiety. There's fear about what's happening next, right? And the same thing is happening to adults. Maybe not in the same way, doesn't look the same way as it does for kids, but they're used to attending that 9 a.m. meeting after they've gotten to work at 8 a.m. They're used to getting up and being presentable. They're used to doing their hair, for women, makeup, getting
Hmm.
their coffee on the way to work. All of these things, they're no longer in your normal routine. Well, what do you expect to do with that idle time while you're waiting for everyone to hop on Zoom and you're not feeling connected when you get on Zoom because it's just different. It's a
It
different
is.
feeling, right? And so that's one way anxiety can really creep in. And then of course being home with your family and not being able to talk to people as often, especially for parents, right? Because now you're managing your kids at home. I know school
Hmm.
is out here in Tampa, but for us homeschooling moms, my goodness, how do you connect with your friends,
Right.
And for the moms who are working from home and still having to, or the parents in general, right, who are working from home and then having to homeschool their kids, how do they stay connected with family and friends when now they're also a teacher? There's less
Hmm.
time to do the things that you would normally do,
But you know.
and the structure's not there. And so that lack of balance with the structure and the routine really allows the brain to say, I'm worried, what's happening next, right? And then that there more feeds into that, and then next thing you know, anxiety and depression can start to creep in.
You know, we might have should have done this earlier, but can you tell us kind of quickly what is, so everybody can be separate the two, what is anxiety when I'm
Hmm.
feeling like I hear the root word in there, anxious, but what
Hmm.
is anxiety, and then what is depression, like from I don't know, like Webster Dictionary or whatever,
Yeah.
version of it you want to give us from your in
Yeah.
layman's terms. Like, can you tell us the difference between
Yeah.
those two?
Sure, of course. Anxiety is basically a fear. And people with this is where the mental illness part comes in, right? Everyone has anxiety that we cannot escape it. Everyone has it, and it's healthy for us to have actually because when you're crossing a street, you need to be a little worried that cars might hit you, right? As we teach kids, look to your left, look to your right. So anxiety is good to have. It protects us. It's a natural instinct. When we get into generalized anxiety disorder, well, that's where people or having anxiety and or fears about things that haven't even happened yet, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
now I have this meeting on Wednesday with someone new and I'm meeting them on Zoom and now they're fearing that, but it's only Sunday, right? And so
Wow.
it's
Right. Right.
excessive fear. And then depression, it's sadness. It's where you get that hopelessness, that hopefulness, the tearfulness. It can definitely be clinical. It can be mild, moderate, or or severe, is how
Hmm.
we classify it in the medical
Okay.
model of counseling. So
Okay.
yeah, that
Perfect.
hopefully that differentiates the two.
Perfect. Yes, because I get anxious sometimes. I get anxious preparing to sit down and do
Yep.
these shows, but that type of anxious, it's okay and it's healthy.
Yep.
It's not leading to fear, and I get kind of frozen, right?
Exactly.
And that's when I'm okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like you, and just to go off that point, it's not stopping you from doing an activity, you know? So
Mm,
if your
yeah.
anxiety led you to be silent on here and I'm just staring at a screen like, Charles, where
Right.
are you? And you're sweating profusely
Right.
all of a sudden, it's like, whoa, this is anxiety. This is turning into like a real counseling
I have a
session.
private session. Can we not go? You need to quit the live session. And Charles, let's talk
I
for a
know.
moment.
Let's just talk
Okay.
for a moment. We'll pick this back up.
That's wow. That's good. And you brought up a good point about I'm having a Zoom call that's on like Wednesday and it's only Sunday, and all of a sudden all of this anxiety is starting to build up. That's a great point because I've had individuals actually reach out to me about that very same thing because some of their senior leaders are now on calls where
Hmm.
normally they would be in meetings and the senior leader is like in a whole different state and wouldn't be involved at all. But
Oh,
now
yeah.
because they're meeting virtually, they have senior leaders in the midst of these
Yep.
presentations and they're feeling anxiety and to the point that they're fearful and they're like, I can't do it, so what do I need to do? So that's a great point that you brought up. So good.
Yeah, that's a good point you just brought up.
Hmm.
I've heard a lot of things that are going on in the workplace right now, but I hadn't heard that one. So
Yeah, yeah,
interesting for me to know as well.
yep, yes, ma'am. So how? Let's talk about now that we've sort of broken down some of the terms and some of the symptoms and talked about isolation. Let's talk about now in the context of our family because we're spending a lot of time with our family right now, and some
Hmm.
of us, and as a relationship expert, I can tell you, are struggling with those relationships because we haven't had to spend as much time together before. So now I
Hmm.
have, and I don't have the outlets that I used to have to be able to get away from working on either the relationship. I used to can go to work or go enjoy my hobby, but now we're all in the house more than we were before. Some of our relationships, when it comes to healthy relationships, they're struggling a
Hmm.
little bit. But let's
Yeah.
talk about how being present and in your presence within your household, if a family member is having some type of symptoms that we talking about, whether it's anxiety, depression, or other mental illness, how can just being present sometime help somebody that's struggling with their mental health right now? And what are the dangers in staying
Hmm.
silent and not, getting involved when you do see some of the symptoms and signs that you shared with us earlier?
Yeah. That's such a good question. How can one, I like how you phrase that. How can someone stay present? And a lot of us are just really ready to get out and get the break that
Hmm.
we once got from our families. And a lot of people say that they've grown closer. I know my family has, my husband and our two
Yeah.
kids, and I still need my break, right?
Right.
So
Right.
every now and again, it's good to go outside and just get a fresh breath of air.
Yeah.
But really, I think if you start noticing some signs, right, to gently ask that person, like, how can I support you right now? And that's a question I always tell people to start
Hmm.
with. I love that question. Several people have reached out to me to say, what do I even say to a friend right now who's dealing with the racial crisis that's going on in the news right now? And I say it can start with, how can I support you right now? That's a very supportive question. It's very sincere, and it's not assuming,
Hmm.
and so when we talk about mental illness, we have to talk about assumptions, because when some family members think, let's just use a name, let's just say Terry seems depressed, and Terry might also have anxiety, right? So then they go to Terry and say, I think you're depressed, I think you have anxiety, I think you need to get some help. And so I've heard these stories, all right. Depending on where Terry is at that point in time, you may or may not get a positive response, right? And so even in my own counseling practice, as well as me personally, I'm very gentle with people when I think they're struggling with mental health. I
Hmm.
first try to seek to understand. I say, hey, you've been a little quiet lately, or you seem to be having trouble going to sleep, or whatever the case may be, whatever you're noticing. Like, I'm just curious, would you like to talk about it? Or, have you noticed any changes in yourself? And that opens that dialogue in a very non-confrontational way. And that's really what's needed when you're dealing with any type of mental health issue, because people tend to get very defensive about their mental health, right? We talked about
Right.
the stigma.
Right.
So that's one thing, really watching how you approach that person and coming from a place of concern, not, I think you have this issue, right?
Hmm. Right.
And then when we talk about I can't remember the second question now. The
So
dangers.
the
Okay, came
danger
back to me.
of
Yeah.
being silent, once you do see and sense that something is going on.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. So the dangers of being silent. Oh my goodness. It can be mild to extreme. I mean, will that person continue to pull away from the family? And now all of a sudden they're no longer eating dinner at the dinner table with everyone, or they're no longer showing up for the family Zoom, like we talked about earlier, or are they starting to show signs that they might have suicidal ideation? Isolation can really take over, and depression can really take over one's mind, and cause them to start having thoughts of, well, no one notices me, no one notices anything is going on with me, so what's my point in being here?
Mm.
People who are depressed have those thoughts, and they have them consistently.
Yeah.
And over time, if no one's checking in on that person, showing some sort of concern, they begin to think that no one cares. And so one of the challenges with your friends and your loved ones is to for you to show up asking the right questions very gently. That challenges their mind, and then their mind is no longer thinking we're alone in this, because someone else
Mm.
is stepping to the plate and showing some concern.
Wow. When I was in the Marine Corps on active duty, we used to get suicide awareness training. It
Mm,
was like annual requirements, and we always would talk about that if one of your Marines has changed his routines,
mm,
and they would talk about if he is not performing in PT like he was, if he's not
mhm,
performing in the training exercises like he was, if he's starting to disassociate himself from activities that he used to love. But they always used to say, and here's the big one, like if they start selling everything and giving
oh
away
yeah.
stuff, like that's a red flag. And so it's like, at that point, would you say it's gone from like mild to now extreme, and you need to take a more aggressive approach, even though you're still
Mm,
gentle? But do you need to say, I'm really concerned because X, Y, and Z? Because at that point, it seems like it's gotten serious, and that's from what we were
yeah.
taught. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, and they taught you all well. Those are all good points, and it's an extreme red flag if someone is all of a sudden selling all of their belongings, or if you have a family member coming to you saying, "Oh, I need your social, I need to add you to my life insurance." huge red flag, right? Like, what's
Right.
going on?
Right.
We've seen some change in behavior here, and now you're wanting to add everyone to the life insurance and make sure everyone has an equal payout. Well, we appreciate
Right.
that,
Right.
but we don't want to lose you.
We don't
No,
want to
not
lose
yet.
you. Right.
So,
Okay.
so yeah, that's a really good point about the extremes. And again, I would just say, you know, going to that person gently, showing
Hmm.
some concern, asking questions around it, especially since we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? And so
Yes.
if that person is unable to get out more, a lot of people are selling their belongings because, or they're
We're gonna
a
lead
lot of
them.
people are decluttering. So
We've been on let go myself, letting some stuff go that I realized I didn't
yeah,
need.
exactly. So we don't want to jump to too many conclusions,
Right.
But that's why you do, like, a
Yeah.
family assessment. But of
Yeah.
course, a family intervention, if that's needed, then sit down with that person and let them know you've seen some serious signs, you have some serious concern. Again, that's challenging their brain's belief that no one cares, and you wrap your arms around that person and you figure out how to get them connected to someone that can really help them.
Yeah. Because so if I've heard you right, what your presence does, it sends the message that they're not alone. And a lot of times when we're starting to feel depressed and we're going down that road, we feel like we're alone. And I've learned that we all as human beings naturally want to be accepted,
Mhm.
acknowledged, and affirmed. And so our presence, by either going to them and having a conversation, or just being there, not walking away, leaving them to themselves, or saying, go get help. Because you could very well say, you might want to go talk to somebody,
Yeah,
or you're changing, you're not acting right, I can't tolerate you. Why don't you go see somebody? That wouldn't be a good
yeah,
approach, right? Because what
yeah.
you're saying, I'm not accepting you the way you are. Go get yourself right, and then come back to me. What's the danger in that,
Exactly.
Marquita?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can lose friends, I've heard stories of people. I haven't talked to my family member in years because they have a mental illness.
Mm,
And that's when it's gotten to an extreme point. Yes, people with mental health disorders do sometimes pull away, right? They do isolate themselves. And sometimes they do so because they don't feel that someone really cares. They don't feel that support. No one's checking in with them on a consistent basis, letting them know that they care. And so,
wow.
yeah, there's cause for major concern when that happens, when people are
Yeah.
pulling away to that extreme.
Wow. Are we helping you guys? Let me know in the chat. Any questions coming in? I've been seeing hearts, Marquita. I can't show the hearts. I only can show the comments, but hearts have been just flowing across the screen. Sometimes I can't even see your face because of all the hearts. So we're getting a
Oh,
lot of
that's
love.
good. Yeah, I'm glad people are enjoying this. I'm glad.
If you have a question for Marquita, please drop it in the comments. But let's talk about our kids. What impact do these sort of times have on our kids? And it probably looks different. So kind of
Yeah,
talk to us about what impact will like a crisis have on our children.
yeah. Ooh, I gotta take a deep breath on that one because I have two toddlers. And I hear so often, kids don't have problems. A lot of parents take that approach to their kids. Oh, you're too young to have problems. And that is the worst thing to do for kids of any age because our kids are experiencing the same thing we're experiencing, right? And in some homes, people are playing the news and or spouses are talking about different updates of things that are going on in the news. And if you don't think your kids are listening, think again. I know my daughter is only 4, but she is listening. I know when she's being nosy. I know when those ears are open. So I have to really watch my words. I have to really watch what information I share with my husband that I've picked up or something new I've learned, because she will come and say, what was that, mommy? What is that about? And so know that your kids are listening, number one. And so it's yeah, I think people have to find a very kid-friendly way to talk to their kids about current circumstances so that it doesn't overwhelm them, so that it doesn't create anxiety. Because all they know is they were in school and then they were out of school and then they didn't go back to school, right? And that anxiety is troubling for kids. Kids are having difficulty falling asleep, having difficulty staying asleep. Even our kids are still getting up in the middle of the night. Well, there's been a huge change in their lives, right?
Hmm.
Teenagers are isolating more. And I can say this from a clinical perspective and from having friends who have teenagers, right? And not even just teenagers, kids between 9 to 12 are isolating themselves in their bedrooms, and they just want to be on their tablets, and they don't want to talk anymore. They
Right.
don't want to come to dinner. They might want to eat, but not at the table like they used to. So those are some of the signs, and also not wanting to go somewhere, right? They've been so confined in their home that when it is time to take them for a drive, or take them to the store, if that's what you're doing now, they don't necessarily want to go
Wow.
because they've gotten used to this idea that it's safer at home. And so we have to think about our
Oh, okay.
language. We're taught,
Okay.
well, it's sweetie, it's safer for us to be at home right now.
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
safer for us. So that's getting implanted in their heads. And so things have started to open up. And now you're saying, oh, come with me to drop this off, or come with me to do
Right.
that. And they're like, oh, no, no,
I
no.
don't want a part of that.
I don't want
No,
a
you
part of
can go
that.
on
It's
your
safer at
own.
home. You said it was hashtag safer at home, so this is where I'm staying. So
Hashtag safer at home.
you have to throw some
Oh
humor
my
in it.
goodness. Yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah, those are some of the signs that kids are dealing with. They're already social distancing, but now they're isolating
They're
socially.
isolating.
So yeah,
Wow.
and they're sitting in that too, and it's impacting their sleep, and maybe even their not even just their sleep patterns, but their eating patterns too. If you've noticed some changes there.
Yes. I've even noticed a change in my own eating patterns. Like
Me
when
too.
we talked about routines earlier, like had a work exercise routine, I had a meal prep routine, and it was like 6 meals a day, and it was ready the night
Wow.
before, and going to the gym, and the amount of water that I would consume throughout the day. I mean, I was hitting my mark, Marquita. I
Yep.
was
You were on it.
that break has messed me up big time.
Yep.
Like my meal prep and exercising at home and all that. Even though I tried to maintain it, it's just because you can't really get into a routine because so much is being adjusted with work requirements and things of that nature and the kids' requirements. It's really
Yep.
been hard for me just personally to actually build a
Mhm.
routine, and so you know, um, not having all that normalcy is affecting kids, is affecting adults. And if we see
Yeah.
our children, I think if you see them, what about like their behavior in terms of acting out and not even just
Yeah.
isolating themselves, standing in the room, but what about, acting out? What does that speak to? Maybe a
Yeah.
little more angry or less patient. Are those also signs and things to be
Yeah.
that their mental health, their mental state of mind is not in a healthy
Absolutely.
place? Okay.
Absolutely. As you were talking, before you said it, I was thinking irritability. I was thinking, I forgot to say
Ah,
irritability.
okay, okay.
Oh my goodness. A lot of times, depression can show up as irritability in kids. And so
Okay.
people will think, oh, my teenager's just talking back, or my toddler's, having more tantrums. And it's irritability, they're irritable.
Yeah.
So they too are frustrated. They too don't know what to do right now. They too don't understand why things suddenly had to change, or we as adults understand, but kids don't always understand fully
Yeah.
because we're censoring some of that for them, right? We don't want to contribute to anxiety. So talking back more, tantrums, my son is having multiple tantrums throughout the day now. And I'm like, I get it. I'm just having to be, I have to practice more patience, right? Let me practice what I preach here. And
Wow.
so, yeah, definitely irritability and just those behavioral changes. Also, nail biting. Nail biting is something that
Okay.
comes up a lot with kids. If you notice your kid is watching TV, and they're just going at it on their nails, or your kid who has a security blanket. My daughter loves her security blanket, and we can barely get her to part with it so we can wash it. But taking that security blanket and just kneading it, that can be a sign of anxiety for your kid. And again, what's coming next? I often hear from my kids, what are we doing next, mommy? Especially before school ended. She was used to that routine of class. Her teacher had a routine and a schedule going, right? And now she's stuck with mommy as the teacher. I'm not horrible, but I am not Ms. Nunez. So, I'm not. So, I'm trying to get your meal ready. I'm trying to do this and that, and
Wow.
so they if you find that your kid is constantly coming to you and saying, what's
What's
next? What can we
next?
do now? Can you turn the TV back on? Can we go outside? They're searching for routine. They're searching for structure. They're
Mm-hmm.
begging for it, in fact, with their behavior. They're not saying it.
Yes.
Watch their behavior. And that's the biggest indicator that something is going on with kids. It's their behavior. They're not going to say it oftentimes. Sometimes
Okay.
they will.
Wow.
But yeah, behavior will show
That
it.
is a great point. I think for kids and adults.
Yep.
Somebody said in the
Exactly.
comments, I've been very irritated a lot. So
And your irritation is very valid.
And there you go. Oh my God, I'm gonna tell my kids that next time. Like, look, you and I both have a right to be irritated right now. However,
Exactly.
let's not fight against each other. Let's fight with one another. That's what we teach couples. So I haven't had to use some of my couples culture on the
Exactly.
kids. Like, let's fight together. So, all right,
Yeah.
good. Let's see. Let's talk about now the COVID-19 pandemic and the potential to sort of scar people with some major mental health, either illness, like
Hmm.
PTSD, even like this is very traumatic, and for
Yep.
some, I know for me, again, going back to the military, it doesn't have to be a combat event to traumatize somebody, right? So let's
Yep.
talk about some of the things within the context of COVID-19 that can really
Mm.
traumatize a person right now, and if we're not careful, could really lead to a traumatic disorder.
Yeah, you read my mind, Charles, because I was thinking one of the first things I was going to say is something about that, how PTSD is viewed as something that only people in the military experience, or only people who've experienced, some brutality or something very extreme, right?
Hmm.
And trauma is anything someone identifies as traumatic, right? And so you don't only see, veterans getting diagnosed with PTSD, or people I'm trying to watch my words because I don't know if people have their kids watching this, but you let your mind go there.
Right.
There are a lot of things that people view in society as traumatic, and it doesn't always have to be that. And so losing a loved one, especially in the middle of a pandemic, is very traumatic for people. And you have the added effects of the way they lost them, right? I've seen stories of people, I think it was in Spain, someone lost his sister and they had to leave the body there a few days. That's
Hmm.
traumatic for
Wow.
him to have to be in the home with his sister's body for 2 years.
Wow.
So, 2 days, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
2 days, not 2 years. So that's a traumatic event. Not only is he grieving, but he's probably dealing with the night sweats and the flashbacks and so on and so forth, right? So that's an extreme version. But if you think about people here in the US who whose family members were diagnosed maybe at the ER, and then they were told you have to go home.
Hmm.
People are having to say their final goodbyes via Zoom or Skype, via FaceTime maybe from a very kind nurse, and it's saddening, and so these are things that definitely contribute to PTSD for people. And another thing is media, watching the news. So not only are people maybe experiencing their own personal attack on their own personal mental health from what they've experienced, losing a family member, losing a friend tragically to this virus, but also the news is showing you everyone else's stories on top of that.
Hmm.
So we're taking that in
Now we're
too.
taking that in.
We're taking that in, and it's sitting there because not a lot of people are releasing it, right? So
Yes.
so yeah, those are some of the ways it can really lead to diagnoses such as PTSD.
Wow. What about, and that includes job loss. I know,
Oh yeah.
people who have, because of it, had to move out of homes, with
Yep.
getting turning back in cars, and
Yeah.
just the whole, some individuals that I know, their social status changed significantly,
Hmm.
right? And they were used to a certain lifestyle, and
Yep.
quality of life, and they lost that through this pandemic, and that could be very traumatic and very trying
Yeah.
time from them. So then there must be a grieving process, a healthy grieving process that we need to go through no matter what we've lost, right? When you
Hmm.
lose something, that means something about your life is getting ready to change. And so you need to have that
Hmm.
time to let go of whatever it is that you have now lost, and then kind of
Hmm.
prepare yourself to make that shift. So what should that grieving process look like for us now, as we've lost a lot of like social things, but some of us have lost job
Yeah.
statuses and different things like that. What should we be doing when it comes to like now this grieving process? And even those who have lost loved ones, I know that's a different type of grieving, but
Yeah.
let's talk
It's all
about grief.
grief.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all grief,
It's
right?
all grief. Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought that up about job loss and social status. Those are things that weren't at the forefront of my mind. So I'm glad you said that for people. I don't want anyone to feel excluded with their grief. So thank you for bringing those things up. Um, it's, grief is a very unique thing. And sometimes people even come to counseling and say, oh, I lost a parent 8 years ago. Let's just go with a parent, right? And I'm still struggling with that. And I say that is normal. So it is.
Like
Some people
first,
think,
you want to let them know.
yeah, first normalize it. Like grief is normal. We all experience it to some extent, and it's something that we go through, and it's not something that we get over. We move forward, but we don't move on,
Okay.
right? And I'm very careful with my language about grief because, like I said, people are still grieving loved ones, things, or lifestyles that they lost from years ago. And so it's important to be kind to yourself. It's important to be gentle, to not try to rush the grieving process, to keep asking yourself, why am I not over this?
Mm-hmm.
It's important to seek support, whether that be counseling or you have a trusted friend. Maybe it's, maybe you need to process some things with your dad after losing your mother,
Right.
and not do that alone. And maybe you need to seek the help of a qualified licensed mental health professional, right? To get some support around that. And to also know when it's time to take a break. When is it time to step back? So on top of all of the healthy things you can do for your mental and physical health, the exercise, the meditation,
Mm-hmm.
the prayer, doing the therapy, sometimes people need to take a break from work or take a break from things, take a break from social circles, especially given the example you gave about someone losing their social status, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they're still hanging out with the same people who are still in that social status, and that's a bit activating for them. That brings up a little too much for them. Well, maybe pull back a little bit. Maybe take some space for a couple of weeks so you can get a grip onto what you're going through. So
Wow.
those are some of, that's just some of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we know that right now the kind of shifting from COVID-19 crisis to the crisis that we're experiencing, sort of the civil unrest from the murders of African American men. It sparked a lot of civil unrest in the nation, riots and protests. They're all directly related to pinned up frustration by the African American race just for decades. But there's a lot of, I would say, silent anger, right, that's been pinned up, and it's dangerous on numerous levels. So how can we facilitate open dialogue that honors this pain and promotes authentic race relations and sort of defines human treatment? Like, what can we do? Because a lot of us, for the first time, we're actually expressing certain emotions, even just about our race, that we may have never expressed before, and having conversations that we haven't had, and sharing and disclosing things with individuals because they're reaching out because of what's going on. But what can we do to really facilitate that open dialogue to honor the pain that some are feeling?
Yeah. Oh, it's such a heavy topic, right? It's such a heavy topic right now, and I know a lot of people are dealing with it. I think one of the first things we can do to facilitate those types of discussions is listen to understand and not to debate. I think a lot of people should put on their counselor hat. I have a lot of friends who tell me, you are way too gentle with these topics, or, you hear people out way too much. Well, it's because that's who I am, and it's because that's how I'm trained to be, right? And so if you're thinking with your counselor hat on, you're not listening to the person so that you can pick up key things to debate.
Okay.
You're listening so you can really, really understand,
It's totally different.
Yeah, it's totally different. Yeah, you're listening to really understand that person. I think there are a lot of groups opening up online on Facebook specifically, a lot of safe spaces for people to ask questions, and not just African American people. Lots of people I see are joining these groups and joining in on the discussion, and they'll put in the group rules. This is a safe space for all. We want to facilitate the discussion. It's open. No one should be attacking anyone in here. And you have moderators who are ready to kick them out if they do. And so really seeking those safe spaces is going to be really important right now, whether that be online or maybe a support group opens up.
Right.
Maybe you join a counseling support group. I don't know, but wherever you can find a safe space.
Right.
So those are two of the ways to open that dialogue. And then the third thing I would say is for everyone to check their racial bias. Really check it at the door when you're going into these discussions with people. It's prevalent.
Yes.
It's very prevalent.
Yes.
And it needs to be checked. Once we address it and check it, then we can approach a discussion or a conversation with an open heart and with an open mind, showing up ready to understand and not to debate.
Mm, that's so good. That's so good.
Thank
So the pandemic, the murders, it's a lot for us to process. What are some, I guess, and we tend to pull toward bad habits all the time. So what are some healthy mental habits we can start practicing today to manage this chaos in a more productive way?
Yeah.
Like, well, are there
That's a
habits we
question.
can develop, and implement that can make us better and protect
Yeah,
our mental health?
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say really monitor what you're allowing in.
Okay.
That that's big. It's not something that you're doing necessarily other than avoiding certain things,
Okay.
right? So there are certain things that aren't going to contribute positively to your mental health. And a lot of times we know what those things are, but we still do them anyway. So just do a little, inventory of the things that don't contribute positively to your mental health and look to significantly decrease your exposure to those things or eliminate it altogether. And
So
then,
watch what we consume.
watch what you consume.
Okay.
Yes, please watch what you consume.
All right.
I do need to practice what I preach better, but that's one suggestion. Some other suggestions are and these are counseling techniques. These next ones, I practice cognitive behavioral therapy, but really, we all have automatic thoughts, right? Especially about what's going on right now, and sometimes those automatic thoughts are very negative. So really challenging those, and you don't have to
Okay.
do it out loud. You don't have to do it to where the next person is thinking that person's talking to themselves. It's something you can do in your mind. No one has to know you're even doing it. But once you catch your automatic thought, reframe it to something more positive. So if for example, the automatic thought is racial tension is never going to get better in America, right? Well, that was your automatic thought. And now it's time to reframe it. We have the potential as a people to join forces together and create change. Something shifted to something more positive. And that's what a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy is about, specifically, really taking the cognitions of our minds, challenging them and reframing them and reworking them and watching what we're exposing ourselves to. So those are some of the things. And I would say definitely add in some meditation to keep you calm
Okay.
because meditation helps connect the brain and the body. So I think a lot of people could really benefit
Yeah.
from meditating right now.
Some yoga, maybe sit down and listen to some rain sounds on the Spotify app or something.
Yeah, listen to
Listen
soothing
to some
music,
ocean sounds and soothing music.
oceans.
Oh my
Exactly.
gosh.
Exactly.
So I have a couple more. I want to honor your time. I want to
Yeah.
ask first the last question, and then we'll go into our rapid fire lead questions. But really quick, how can we heal from burnout? If somebody's already burned out because of work, because of struggling, to navigate the change, what can we do to start healing and get over the burnout? Is probably some of those three things that you just suggested. But anything
Mhm.
else you want to add to that specifically
Yeah,
to get over burnout?
absolutely. Burnout is one of my favorite topics.
Okay, good.
Yeah, one of my favorite topics that I do in my coach that I work with women on in my coaching program. So a lot of times people haven't really acknowledged it. They haven't given it a name. And we talked earlier about mental illness and how for some people there's a stigma around getting diagnosed with something, and for some people it's very relieving. They feel very free once they know, okay, it's PTSD. That explains it. Now that I
Mm,
understand it, right?
right,
And so same thing goes for burnout. If you have all these symptoms of burnout and you haven't acknowledged that that's what it is, and you think it's just because you didn't get a pay raise, then
right.
then you need to, which is definitely a reason, definitely can contribute to feeling burned out in your job. But that first step is always awareness, having awareness that you've identified it. All right, it's
Wow.
burnout. And then you need to figure out what's contributing to this. There may need to be some introspection. You may have to start looking at your schedule and your day. You may have to start keeping a journal daily.
Hmm.
What did I do today? When did I notice I was more frustrated than not? That's another step. A third thing is really some good self-care. I love self-care, right? So again, like you said, it probably be some of the same things we already discussed. So that meditation, that exercise. Do you have a hobby? Do you
Hmm.
have a good hobby? Are you still connecting with friends? Especially with burnout, And a lot of mental illnesses, like I said, people pull away, right? Same thing with burnout. You're too burned out to engage in your life. After you
Wow.
leave work, you're burned out.
Wow.
So why would you be connecting with friends? So really making sure you reconnect with friends, open up that dialogue, let them know what's going on with you at work. And of course, getting some support.
Wow.
Get a coach, get a counselor,
Yeah.
get someone to help walk you through that. And the last thing is that people don't like to hear this all the time, but sometimes you might need to take a break from work, take a sabbatical if you can. If you can't, it might be time to look at some different options.
Mm.
If if all of these symptoms can't be relieved and you're still doing what you can on your own with the exercise
Yeah.
and really feeding your brain positive things, then it might be time to take a look at maybe a different role with your organization or a different company altogether.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yes, because sometimes it's just your environment that has burned you out. That's a
exactly.
great point. I'm gonna throw one more at you because this came in the
Sure.
chats real
Yeah.
quick.
Yeah.
Is anger often a part of the grieving process? Kind of going back to grief. Is
Oh
anger a
yeah.
part of the grieving process? And if so, how do you process your anger constructively?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that's a great question. Anger is definitely a part of the grieving process. And so there are 5 stages of grief, actually. So there's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
Okay.
And so the anger can be, like we talked about earlier, it can span across years. People can remain angry if you don't channel that anger into something positive. So there are certainly anger management classes, or you can work with a counselor to help you with your anger.
Hmm.
But then also, one of the ways that people really start to heal through their grief is to somehow honor their lost loved one, or to somehow honor, maybe you had a job that you really liked the work you were doing, but it wasn't feeding your soul.
Mm.
You were no longer passionate about it. You were burned out because of how you were treated, right?
Wow, that's so
So
good.
maybe, yeah, maybe you find something, maybe you create a nonprofit organization, or maybe you start tutoring kids, if you were a teacher or whatever. Find a way to honor that passion, that thing that you lost, that person that you lost. When people lose people, humans, they sometimes start doing, like cancer walks. They'll do
Right.
once a year, or they'll create a memorial fund or whatever. So finding a way to honor that person helps you rechannel that negative energy into something positive. And then over time, you're so engaged with this new positive thing that the anger decreases and you
Wow.
start to feel that healing really take place. That
That's
was a really
so
good
good.
question.
Yes, that was a great question and that was a great answer. Thank you. I just learned a
Thank
lot
you.
in that myself. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we could talk all night, and I know we've gone
No,
over
such
our
great
hour
topics.
now at this point, but we needed this conversation, so
Yeah,
I didn't want to cut it off at all. Let's do our rapid fire lead questions, and then I'm
let's do
gonna
it.
have to end our broadcast. But
Okay.
thank you so much in advance for this time. Thank you for your wisdom and your sincerity, and just
Thank
wow, this has been truly helpful for me. I got to go back and listen to it and take my notes.
you.
But man, yeah, I hope you guys
Thank
are
you.
and ladies are being helped out there as well. So we like to end all of our broadcasts with asking our guests 4 questions. We call them our lead questions because the first word starts with one of the letters that spell out the word lead. So if you're ready, we're gonna go ahead and dive into
I'm
those.
ready.
All right.
I
So
stay
the
ready.
first, stay ready. I knew you were gonna say that. The first one is learn. What have you learned in your years as a leader that has impacted you the most? What lesson have you learned?
Yeah. So this one came from my time as a residential clinician working with teenagers. People don't care what you know until they know that you care. So that's
See, I'm supposed to take notes afterwards. Somebody put that in the chat for me. Okay.
people don't care what you know until they know that you care.
Yeah,
People have to know that you care about them.
that's so good. All right. Expectation. What do you think is the number one thing people expect from leaders?
Mm, I'll have to go with, yeah, I think honesty on that one. I
Okay.
really think people, they want honesty from their leaders. When leaders hide things from people that they found out or that they know, it creates this environment of mistrust.
Yeah.
So if you're a leader, please start with honesty. You can lead
That's
very well with
that
honesty.
right. That's so good. First one to say honesty, so I like it.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Okay.
Acceptance. What should new leaders learn to accept when stepping into a new role? So new leaders, what do they need to learn to accept when stepping into a leadership role?
Yeah. People are not going to like everything that you have to say. I think that leaders need to understand that they will get pushback, and just because you are in a leadership role, others aren't going to look at you as the end all be all
Mm,
to whatever topic you're discussing or teaching. And
right.
so people will have questions. There will be polarity, and it's all about how you choose to handle it and whatever your level of self awareness is
Wow, that's
as a
good.
leader.
The D for a decision. Is there a blueprint that you sort of personally follow when making decisions, Marquita? What kind of guides your decision making?
Absolutely. Yeah, I always pray first. I try
Amen.
to pray first. And then I'm a researcher, so I'll do a lot of research
Okay.
on whatever it is I want to know about. And then I talk to someone.
Hmm.
And, that could be my husband or a friend. And I have a counselor as well. I'm a
Right.
counselor that definitely promotes other counselors having a safe space to speak. So I'll also run it by my counselor. That's my
That's
blueprint.
a great blueprint. You talk to
Yeah.
God, you do some research, you educate yourself, and then you run
Yeah.
that by somebody like that's accountability partner almost, like
Yep.
somebody. Yeah, yeah,
Accountability.
yeah. That's really
Absolutely.
good. I love it. Miss Marquita, this has been great. I could talk to you all night. I want to real quickly have you share with the folks listening how they can connect with you, how they can learn more about you, where can they go to follow you and just really connect with you because I think that we need more individuals such as yourself in this field who are courageous and sincere and compassionate as you are and who have been there and done that and helping people come out of mental depression and just really getting over it. So let us know how we can connect with
Oh, thank you so much for your kind words. I could talk to you for
you.
all
Yeah.
night forever about these topics because this has been really good, and I hope that it's been beneficial for those who have been listening. Really appreciate you allowing me into your space to
Yeah.
talk about
Thank
this.
you.
So you can find me on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram. My handle is at mmyrick coaching, and you can also just search for Marquita Myrick. I should be tagged in the video, or if not, I'll comment
Yes.
later, and you can find me there. Would love to connect, and also marquitamyrick.com.
Wow. And you do counseling and mindset coaching, right? As
Yep,
well.
I do both. Absolutely.
All right. So we all need to connect with you because the power, true strength is in the mind. True strength is
Yeah,
in the mind. I don't care how strong
it
you are
is.
physically. True strength is of the mind. So thank you so much for this time. Thank you for all those who have been with us this last hour and 10 minutes. This has been great. We will be back next week. We're sort of shifting gears a little bit. Our focus will not just be on the COVID-19, but we're really going to talk about the civil unrest that is going on and sweeping the nation. And we're going to bring in a series of guests to, in between our leadership discussions, talk about how we can navigate those times. And so come on back next week, same time, same place. Until then, stay safe, stay together, because together we can come out stronger. Miss Marquita, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.